And forget my attire, man. We just we're in 40 days of prayer and fasting, so we have prayer every night. So I literally ran home from our evening prayer.
Okay.
So I'm just kind of casual tonight, brother.
Oh, well, that's what the call is. It's a casual conversation.
Cool.
I'm sending now. Van Moody, what is? You have a music label?
No, I don't, man.
Oh, somebody else. Van Moody, Facebook.
I think I know I'm Van_Moody on Twitter. I can tell you the Facebook handles.
I got you.
You got them on?
It's just another Van Moody record label that's out there.
Maybe prophetic. I don't know. We'll see. I receive it.
I don't know. You got some tunes. You do everything else. You might have a couple of tunes in you.
Oh yeah. Oh, Van_Moody. Yes, Twitter and Instagram is Van_Moody7. Yeah, you got all of that. Are you in New Jersey now?
Yes, sir.
Nice. How's everything up there, man?
It's good, man. I was supposed to be down that way in Memphis at St. Jude's, and all the weather was bad up here, so they canceled all the flights.
Really?
Yeah, so we're doing some partnership with St. Jude, and so they had a pastoral tour that we were doing. It was actually tonight, but they canceled all my flights. I couldn't get out, so.
What is this? What's going on in Jersey? Just raining or what?
Yeah, just rain, thunderstorms. It didn't seem like it was that bad because actually I was supposed to fly out last night, and they canceled the flights last night, canceled all the flights. Then I thought I was gonna get out today, and by the time they kept going round and round, I said, "Man, I'm going home."
Wow.
Yeah, but I'll be your way later this month, Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
Labor Day Classic. Alabama State. So, wow. I mean, you got Jeremy Spratling, you remember?
Yeah.
We always do Labor Day Classic. I'm in Birmingham for Magic City Classic.
Sure.
What about you? You been traveling or you been home?
Yeah, I have been traveling, man. Right before I went back to DC, I was in London speaking, and I do the 700 Club next week, so I got to travel for that. And then I get back and got to speak down in Montgomery. So a little bit of travel, a little bit, yeah, a little bit of stuff going on. And I do a sabbatical in the summer, so I take June and some of July off. So that was good. And my wife, we celebrated her 40th birthday this year. So I took her we went to Bali, which was cool. Yeah.
How was it?
Man, it was amazing. It takes a long time to get there, but it's definitely worth it.
What was the flight, man? My wife's birthday is in October and we're going to Barcelona. How long was that flight?
Total travel time was 20 something hours. We were already out in LA. So we went from LA to Seoul, Korea to Singapore to Bali.
Ooh. Man. Now, how long did it take you once y'all got there? Y'all had to sleep a day or two just to regroup?
Actually, I think we were okay. Coming back was harder. And it's weird. My wife, struggled going. I struggled coming back. So like when I got there, I was able to hop on the time and roll, but coming back, it took me probably about a week or two to get back and adjust.
Okay. Yeah. I don't like the travel part of it. I like to get where I'm going, but do without. Now, y'all, how many kids y'all have, man?
Two.
Two. Okay.
Yeah, girl and a boy. Daughter's 11, son's 9.
Gotcha.
Well, man, if you guys go to Barcelona, you guys are going to go see the Sagrada Familia?
Yes, sir. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Barcelona?
A little bit.
You got to give me the must-hit spots. It's our first time.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll, when are you guys going? October, you said?
Yeah, October 14th, I believe.
Okay. All right, I'll send you a text. Definitely the Sagrada Familia.
Okay. All right, now I'm just about ready. All right, Pastor Dorian Morgan, what's going on, sir? Been all right? Pastor Wright, how are you? Carolyn Brooks. Hey. All right, y'all. Well, it's late. We got a special guest with us tonight, and I'm excited. Thank everybody for keeping up with these two-man Tuesdays conversations. As y'all know, we've been having these two-man talks last 2 months or so. And so y'all know I try to bring y'all some of the best and brightest leaders and executives and artists and athletes around this whole concept of it takes two. So tonight I have a very special guest. He's no stranger to teamwork and understanding how to select the right people. So just so everybody is aware, the book It Takes Two, Who Is Helping You Lead, basically talk about the principle of no great leader has ever done anything by themselves. So if you go through history, whether you go back to Caesar, had Mark Antony. If you talk about Abraham Lincoln, he had a guy named William Seward. If you talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, Bayard Rustin, and Ralph Abernathy. Talk about Steve Jobs. You have Steve Wozniak. Just the list goes on and on. No great leader has ever done anything great by themselves. They always had good help. And so tonight I have an individual who I feel could speak right into this subject. He has a lot of amazing things going on himself. So with no further ado, everybody give it up for Van Moody. What's up, man?
Hey, brother, how you doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. What's happening in your world?
Leading and being led by God and everything that comes with it, man.
Okay, all right. So you kind of heard the topic and what we've been talking about with these two men. So kind of tell me before we even get into it, kind of your initial thoughts on that. I know you are the relationship guru. So kind of tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I think number one, let me first of all tell you that I'm proud of you addressing this topic, because it's something that absolutely we need. It is unfortunate that the dominant thought in our society is what I call a Lone Ranger mentality. And that's incorrect. History reveals that biblically, that picture of isolationism is incorrect. And so I applaud you for broaching this subject and really trying to impress upon people the importance of understanding that team is the better way to accomplish more things. One of the things that I'll often teach people and other leaders, I do a lot of leadership development and leadership training, and I believe that the Bible is the greatest leadership book that's ever been written. But one of the things that the Bible makes very clear is that one is too small a number to accomplish greatness. You see it with Moses. You see it with every major leader in the Bible. None of them did anything by themselves. And one of the questions that I often raise to leaders is if Jesus, as the Son of God, understood that he needed a team, then obviously we as leaders have got to follow his model. For an example, I'm leading a group in October to the Holy Land, and I love going to Jerusalem, been there several times, but this year I'm leading a group of over 200 people. And one of the things that always fascinates people when they go to the Holy Land is how small it is. You know, one of the principles that I teach people is, with such a small area, you know, guess who took the gospel around the world? It wasn't Jesus. Jesus was the savior of the world, but Jesus didn't carry the gospel around the world. Jesus walked and spent his entire ministry within the confines of present-day Palestine and Israel, which is a very small geographical location. But you and I are believers, and so many other people that are probably on this webinar are believers because of the team that Jesus assembled. It was them that took the gospel around the world. And that's just a constant reminder that trying to do it all by yourself is a setup for failure. It takes two. And I would argue that if you're going to do something significant, it even takes more than two. And so it's important that we think by way of teams, and great leaders understand that.
Good stuff, man. I knew I had the right person for this subject. So, man, let me ask you this. So there's a man that says 6 degrees of separation. So before we get into this introduction, man, I just want to first say, man, it's funny. You know, I watched you from afar for years.
Sure.
Then we initially connected. I think we were sitting at the same table in Phoenix.
Yeah.
One year for conversations. Then I found out, I think through you, I knew you knew my first pastor, Terrence Johnson. So I knew we had a relationship. Then you and my current pastor, Dr. Daniels, had another type of connection through another individual named Kelly Varner.
Absolutely.
Discovered that. And then the president of my nonprofit, my mentorship organization, is a member of your church.
Yeah.
So I said, man, so maybe that is true, 6 degrees of separation. Everybody.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Well, man, tell us, we know about the great Van Moody, the pastor, the leader.
Right.
National, but tell the people, who are you? Who your mama now? Like,
man, I'm just, I'm a regular dude, man, from Atlanta, Georgia. I had the honor of growing up in the A, as we say, if you're from Atlanta. Grew up in the A and went to Douglas High School. And man, I'm just the product of a great family. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher. And so I got the best of both worlds. My father's family, interestingly enough, they were church planners. And my dad was a musician. My mother was a PK. So I had the best of really both worlds. I was thoroughly grounded in all things faith, but then also music. My dad, being a musician for 40 plus years, I just grew up with a great love for music. I played the saxophone for many years, much of my youth. And then also I was avid into sports. I played basketball there at Douglas and then went on and played at DePaul. A lot of people don't know much about DePaul, but our new claim to fame now is Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens, who is the Boston Celtics coach, he and I played on the same team together. And so, yeah, man, I'm just a regular guy. You know, I grew up in church, and I often tell people I grew up in church, but I didn't always grow up in the Lord. But I had some pretty profound encounters as a kid with God. And I used to want to be an attorney, and it was those profound encounters that set me on the path of ministry. And I grew up with great mentors. You talked about a second ago, your mentorship organization. A lot of who I am is because of the mentors that poured into me to shape my life all through high school. My cousin and I worked out every morning before we went to school with 4 men that shaped me. I'm an Omega in terms of my fraternal associations. And a part of it is because, the men that mentored me were all Qs. All my pastors were Qs. And so I grew up seeing real Omega men, and they taught me a lot about what it looks like to be a man. My dad is Omega as well. And so I've just been blessed to have some really good men in my life to help shape me. And that really has probably laid the greatest foundation in my life, faith and good mentorship. And so that's a little bit about my background, man. My parents are still in Atlanta. My mom sent me away. I didn't get a chance to go to Morehouse. I wanted to, but she said, you're gonna get out of Atlanta. You got to learn how to live on your own and not depend on me. So I got a full academic scholarship to go to DePaul, and man, just started following the Lord, man. Worked in full-time ministry the whole time I was in college. After college, went right into seminary. Right out of seminary, I started a PhD and then had an opportunity to go work at the Vatican with Pope John Paul II. And from there, went to Germany with the World Council of Churches. And so, man, God has just opened some incredible doors for me and exposed this little kid, from the A to some incredible things that have shaped me. And I'm grateful. But also, one of my life verses is Luke 12:48, to whom much is given, much is required. And that has been probably the grounding verse of my life, because I recognize that these opportunities that God has given me come with heavy responsibility. And so, man, I really love Jesus, as probably corny as that sounds to some people.
Yeah.
I really love him, fell in love with him at an early age. If it were not for him, I wouldn't be here. I'd probably be dead or be in jail somewhere. And I have endeavored to live a life that's brought him glory and honored him in significant ways. So that's in a nutshell who I am, man. We have been here in Birmingham for 13 years, started the church 12 years ago. And it's been great to see how God has moved through our multi-sites. So it's been a blessing, man, to serve him.
Wow, man, people wouldn't even know that. So you a hooper?
Yeah.
You a Q?
Yeah.
Yeah, people wouldn't even know that about you. See, we found, and you from the A.
From the A.
From the A. Okay, all right. So because a lot of people, I'm looking at a lot of people who normally watch this. We got some who are in the church world. We got
Sure.
a lot of entrepreneurs who follow,
Sure.
who may not be in the church. How would you say just that, or what would you credit? I know you talked about the men in your life and mentors, but like, how important was that exposure for you to end up doing what you're doing now? But you could have went a multitude of ways. You didn't
Sure.
have to be a preacher. Like, how, for people who may be watching this and like, man, how did you navigate all that and then decide that, okay, I want to be a pastor of a church?
Sure. Well, number one, I didn't make that decision. God made it for me. And to be honest, if it was up to me, I wouldn't pastor. In fact, for many years, I ran from it. And the law and business was what I wanted to do. And God gave me one out of the two. He did give me the opportunity to be very successful in business, to learn a lot in business, and to take a lot of what I learned and even the favor that God had given me, and we then transplanted that into ministry. A lot of it was exposure. I was blessed by a couple of people who opened my world. There was one of my financial mentors who's gone on to glory now. He was the son-in-law of the owner and founder. If people know Atlanta history, then they understand who Jesse Hill is. Jesse Hill was one of the early Black entrepreneurs in Atlanta. He was the founder of Atlanta Life Insurance. And so he was one of the early multimillionaires in Atlanta as an African-American man. And his son-in-law mentored me. His son-in-law was my financial mentor. And he saw stuff in me that I didn't even see in myself. And even when I knew that I was called to ministry, one of the things that he said to me is, he said, man, when I get finished with you, you're going to be an incredible pastor. He says, because you're going to know business and you're going to know ministry, because they have to connect. And so, man, he took me under his wing and exposed me to a lot. He was a serial entrepreneur. He owned several Mrs. Winters franchises around Atlanta. He had a ton of businesses, and just gave me a front row seat to understand, number one, what it takes to lead at that level. What it takes to even think at that level. And he exposed me to so much, even by way of my diet of reading. I'm a voracious reader. I read a ton of stuff. And it was because he shaped me that way. The first thing he did was told me, you got to read this book, and this book, and then tell me what you learned. And so he just was a stickler for paying it forward, but then also stewarding what he was given by way of business and entrepreneurship, and making sure that the next generation really extended his legacy. So it was those things. And I had the same thing on the ministry side. I had great men and women that saw things in me that I didn't see in myself, and they just made the investment. And I was smart enough to listen and to not be a kid that thought that I knew it all. I didn't quite understand why they saw these things in me, but now I get it, you know? So it was really just being wise enough to listen and to thank the people and appreciate the relationships that God providentially put in my life, which is why I spend so much time talking about relationships, writing about them, because I learned at an early age that the kingdom of God, business, and really everything revolves around relationships.
Gotcha. So when you went so you doing work at the Vatican and Rome,
Sure.
from Atlanta, DePaul, and the Midwest, how did Birmingham get on the radar? What made you plant a church in Birmingham?
Yeah, relationships and God. And so when I moved back from working in Germany, I was in Atlanta for a short period of time and really just seeking God about what my next place was going to be, because I had a leading that it was going to be outside of Atlanta. Although I loved Atlanta, my dream used to be that I wanted to be in Atlanta and raise a family there. But I had this sense that God had something else for me. So I ended up accepting a position as an executive pastor for a large ministry in South Florida. And I ended up running the entire facility. We had a Christian school, a community development corporation, a human services agency, and the church. And so God opened an incredible door for me to come in and ultimately manage that entire operation. It was at that church that I met my wife, and we ultimately got married. And the favor that God had given me with that pastor there, he encouraged me to do what I was doing for him in a consulting fashion. So I ended up starting my own consulting business, and he literally began to open doors with a lot of his friends and other leaders and saying, hey, you want to consider hiring this guy to do some leadership development and financial modeling and a lot of other things for you. And my business kind of grew in that regard. And so as my business began to grow through relationships, I forged a relationship with a marketing firm that was based in Birmingham. And it was a symbiotic kind of thing. If they had a client that needed my services, leadership development, financial model, construction management, stuff like that, they would refer them to me. And if I had a client that needed web design, marketing, branding, I would refer them to them. And one day I was literally sitting in my office. So Birmingham was not on my radar. I had only been to Birmingham twice in my life. One time for a wedding, the other time as a kid in our youth group from Atlanta. The church that I attended, we came over and toured the Civil Rights Museum. So I didn't know anything about Birmingham. Actually, let me correct that. I've been a third time because my freshman year of college at DePaul, I rode home with a girl who lived in Birmingham, and my mother came over and picked me up in Birmingham. So literally, that's all I knew of Birmingham. Didn't know anything about the city, didn't know anybody there. And I was sitting in my office in Fort Lauderdale, and the president of Details Communications, which was the marketing and branding firm, called me and said, we think we have a guy that you need to meet in Birmingham. And I said, well, okay. And he told me it's a guy, a great pastor, legendary guy who was looking for some leadership development, some coaching, mentoring for his leaders, etc. And they said, can we connect the two of you? And I said, sure. And he called me maybe an hour later, and I started consulting for him, flying back and forth, really helping him to prepare the church for his retirement. And little did I know that God was going to use that to ultimately move my wife and I to Birmingham. We left everything behind. My wife was a university professor there in Miami, and I had my business and was working at the church there. So we were very comfortable, doing very well. But all of that led to us moving to Birmingham, and it was that same pastor that encouraged us to plant the ministry. And he retired, and he was the first member of our church. He passed a couple of years ago on Father's Day of all days, went to glory. But his wife, his son, his daughter-in-law, and his grandkids are still members of our church and very active. So God just literally through that relationship, from relationship to relationship to relationship, that's how we got to Birmingham and how the church was birthed.
Wow, incredible. So as y'all can hear, this is the relationship man. Everything he talks about. is relationships. So let's just take a minute to pause as people are jumping on and jumping off and they go watch this later. So Van Moody, how can people find you? Where are you located? What's your website? Just so people want to connect and follow you.
Sure. Well, the easiest thing is they can go to vanmoody.org and get all of the information in terms of my social media handles. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I am on Instagram. I've got a YouTube page, but all of that can be easily accessed from vanmoody.org. They can also go to twccc.org. That's our church website, the Worship Center Christian Church. That's what the TWCCC stands for. And we're a multi-site church in and around the Birmingham area. People can also pick up my books. I've written a few bestsellers, The People Factor, The I Factor. And then my brand new book actually comes out today. It's out now worldwide. It's called Desired by God. And so people can also connect with me that way.
Okay. All right. Well, man, I know recently you've been in the news.
Yes.
Not new for you. You're always in the news, but I know recently you've been in the news in terms of prison reform and some stuff.
Sure.
What's going on with that? How was that whole experience?
Well, it was good in a sense, but also it was challenging in another sense. People took the small snippet that the media captured of my recent meeting at the White House when I was thanking the president actually for some comments that he made actually before the media came in the room. And so, you had a contingent that was angry that I went. You also had a contingent that took that statement out of context and thought that I was endorsing him. So we've had to kind of address that. But beyond all of that, we have an opportunity to actually make some significant strides in prison reform. I'm hopeful. The First Step Act bill, which was the reason I was there. And a lot of people think that the news that they saw recently of me being there a couple of weeks ago was the very first time. And that's not true. I was actually there in April. And this didn't originate with the president. It actually originated with his team. Many people who know their history know that Jared Kushner's father was in prison. A lot of people don't know that Chris Christie actually was the prosecuting attorney that sent Jared Kushner's father to prison. Exactly. So that's a lot of history that actually goes back into perhaps why Chris Christie didn't get a cabinet position in the president's administration. But I was originally invited because of the work that we've been doing for many years here in Alabama in prisons. We're in 8 different prisons consistently. We are ministering in 8 different prisons every week. We actually run programs within the prison, Celebrate Recovery. We have a freedom ministry called Life. And so we have not only done extensive ministry, but we've seen a ton of prisoners turn their life around, give their life to the Lord. A lot of those guys come out of prison, join our ministry. And so I was originally invited because Jared Kushner and his team are really trying to move the needle on prison reform. He's got a personal stake in this because of growing up with his dad in prison. And this is one of the big issues that he's championing, and the president has given him his blessing. So they asked me earlier in April to come and to weigh in on a bill called the First Step Act. And I did. I went and shared with them what I thought about the bill. And there were a lot of things in its original iteration that I did not agree with, didn't like about the bill. And I was brutally honest, went there speaking truth to power. And Ramone, I could tell you, I actually thought I would never be invited back. But I was surprised that they really welcomed my feedback and continued to ask me to give them more and more input. So we were able to craft the bill, tweak it. The bill has passed the House. It's yet to pass the Senate, but we're, trying to get that done. And so the follow-up meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago, that was all the scuttlebutt, was really a follow-up to that meeting. The president came in for a brief second, and then he left. And so the little bit that the media captured was not the full meeting. There was a lot that happened before he came in. There was a lot that happened after he left rather. So, I'm hopeful. But for me, here's a good leadership nugget. I really believe that effective leaders put the needs of others above themselves. I believe that effective leaders have to be selfless. It cannot be about you if it's going to take two and if you're going to build a healthy team. One of the clear responsibilities of leaders are to develop others and to pour into others and to sacrifice their agenda for the needs of others. And so there were a lot of people who said, why could you go? And, how you can't trust him. And a lot of people, our country is very divided right now, and a lot of people had a lot of negative things to say about that meeting. But what was interesting is they missed the fact that I didn't go for him. It was never about him. It was about the people in prison that may never get an opportunity to get to a table and to speak up for themselves, and particularly African-American men, if we can just keep it real. African-Americans make up 12 to 13% of the U.S. population, but we are well over 35% of the prison population. And if we wonder where are all of the men of color, the majority of them are in prisons. And so this is a family issue. This is a work issue. This is a community issue. This is a big deal. And for me, it's bigger than politics. It's bigger than pettiness. It's bigger, than likes and dislikes. It's really about what Jesus tells us. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. And what we've done to the least of them, we've done also unto him. So that's why I went. That's why I'm committed to hopefully seeing change in this area of prison reform. And for me, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. It's bigger than that. We've got to work on behalf of people who are incarcerated, who spent far too much time in the prison system. Can I tell you a quick story, Ramone, real quick? Alabama is one of the worst states right now in terms of overpopulation of prisons. So Alabama is about 173% overpopulated. And if Alabama as a state doesn't address this issue, the federal government's going to step in, because it then is going to border on civil rights violation. But let me tell you, one of the guys that I met in prison met a former prisoner who spent 30, 40 years on death row to be exonerated, and it changed my life. His name is Anthony Ray Hinton. If you're familiar with Brian Stevenson's book on Just Mercy and any of the work that he's done with the Equal Justice Initiative, Anthony Ray Hinton was one of the men that he got off of death row because he was wrongfully convicted. And they knew that he was wrongfully convicted for quite some time. DNA evidence many, many years ago proved that he did not commit the crime. Okay. But people were so dead set against getting this guy released that the Alabama Supreme Court would not even recognize new evidence for many years. The only reason he was able to get out of prison is because Brian Stevenson argued his case before the U.S. Supreme Court. So the point is, I met this man, and sitting down and talking to him, I think he actually has a book coming out, or it's getting ready to come out, or maybe it just recently has come out. But it's those kinds of stories that keep me awake at night, that haunt me, that here this guy who was cutting grass in his front yard, cutting his mother's lawn. He was like 18, 19 years old, and was picked up by the police. And here's what the police said to him. He said, I didn't do it. He had an alibi. He was at work during when the crime was committed. And they said to him, we don't care. You're going to prison for two reasons: because you're black and because you're ignorant. And so, yeah, those stories that people think happened years and years and years ago, they're still going on to this very day. And Alabama is one of the worst states where these things are happening. And so, we've given our lives, man, to really be in the hands and feet of Jesus, particularly in prisons, and for people like Anthony Ray Hinton, who've been wrongfully accused. So, the lynching museum that a lot of people are just talking about right in our backyard. Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, who was the attorney that got Anthony Ray Hinton off, was the lead guy who helped to bring that lynching museum to its fruition. That's just an hour down the street from us in Montgomery. So that's the climate, and that's a part of the reason why I had to be at the table if I was invited to hopefully bring some help and change in this area of prison reform.
So what do you say to help people? Because there's younger leaders that's coming up, younger pastors, younger leaders in civil rights or whatever, that may be invited to something like this, or that want to fight issues, and sometimes you have to go to the highest power. What would you say? So let's say you're in your 40s now. Let's say there's a young leader, a young pastor in its mid-20s.
Yep.
What would you advise him when an opportunity like that presents itself? Because you
Yeah.
see, you getting hate, you getting people not understanding, you getting people saying that, man, you selling out the black race when you know you trying to help black people, but people have so much to say. And then we're in this soundbite generation where we're getting clips, we're getting photo ops, and really don't understand. How would you counsel a pastor or a leader that you're mentoring and they have the opportunity to do that same thing years down the path? What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, I think every leader needs to know that real leadership is not a popularity contest.
Mm.
And the challenge that a lot of leaders run into is that they want to lead and they want to be well liked at the same time. Now, there are seasons where those things will coexist, but not all the time. You know, history is one of the greatest assets that a real leader can have, because if you go back and study great leaders, what you will find is that great leaders have always been challenged. And it's interesting because history judges greatness. And we look back and we romanticize great leaders.
Yeah.
But we really miss the challenge that they went through at that particular moment. So for an example, I think, you know, every person of color and across the board, I don't think it's just relegated to people of color. I think that people around the world understand the greatness of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
But what we miss is the agony, the depression, and also the hate that he received. You know, a lot of African Americans, for an example, don't know their history. Unfortunately, a lot of times we are biblically illiterate and historically anemic.
Wow.
And so, for an example, Dr. King's at a season, his greatest opposition came from the African American community, and particularly preachers. You know, the split between the National Baptists and the Progressive Baptists happened because the National Baptist guys did not support Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s stance. You know, people have heard of the letter from Birmingham jail. That letter was to preachers and other leaders that opposed him. And so, you know, think about Churchill, which was an amazing movie, by the way, but if the history of him, or even Lincoln and all of the opposition that they had to endure just to do the right thing. And so one of the things that I tell younger leaders is, number one, you got to be called to this. And you got to know who you are, and you got to rest in that, because there will be seasons when making the right decision and following God is not popular. And it takes a person that is secure in themselves, that understands their calling, and doesn't need to get a sense of self-worth and gratification from other people, but they get it because they innately know who they are. It takes that kind of leader to lead, particularly if you're going to be effective and do anything of significance. Wow. So those are the things that I tell young leaders, and I tell them too, don't burn bridges, right? Anger is not a strategy. I understand that a lot of people are angry. I mean, I've been on record criticizing the president. I've written tons of op-eds and expressed a lot of what I don't think is right. But at the same time, once we move beyond our anger and our frustration, what is the strategy? And great leaders have a strategy. And all great strategies at some point involve communication. So if you're angry and go over in your corner and think that you're leading, you're not leading. At some point, we've all got to figure out, how do we come to the table? And even if I dislike you, how can I work with you to move forward the agenda that I know is most important, not just for me, but for other people? Wow. And so great leaders have got to understand that. If you think, and I tell this to the young leaders, if you think that you're going to always be popular and get along with everybody, or everybody's going to like your decision, you've deluded yourself. That's not leadership. Leadership is, you're out front. You're blazing trails. That's the prophetic mantle of leaders. And if you look at even prophets in the Bible, a lot of times they were sent out front. The apostles, the apostolic grace on their life, they were sent out front. They were blazing trails. And a part of being out front and blazing trails means you run the risk of being misunderstood. Gotcha. You know, people didn't understand Elijah. What do you mean it's not going to rain? Are you crazy? You know, people didn't understand Jesus at all times. I mean, his own hometown didn't receive him. Yeah. You know, so it's just a part of it. It's not comfortable, but it's the calling of great leaders.
Man. Good stuff, y'all. This is Van Moody. You hearing it from his own words. So, all right, we talked about that, and I think they beat you up and hugged you, now they loving on you again, all that good stuff. But man, what I want to talk a couple of things, a few minutes that we have.
Sure.
You have, as I said, you've been writing on relationships. You have the People Factor book. You got the I Factor book. Just kind of in a quick summary for people who don't have the book, I think the People Factor was just a phenomenal book and just kind of movement in itself. Why did you write People Factor?
I wrote it because one of the things that I wish I would have learned early on, we talked about mentorship a moment ago. I wish someone would have set me down earlier and taught me how to manage relationships, because everything revolves around them. And I got that, but I did not understand that there are fundamental laws by which all relationships work. And so I had to learn it the hard way. I made a lot of mistakes in relationships as a leader, bumped my head several times. And I agonized. Why didn't anybody teach me this? And so what I did was I took all of that wisdom and I paid it forward, because I wanted to help people understand that if you can, number one, understand that everything revolves around relationships, but then number two, honor those relationships and work them the right way, your life will rise and fall on that. Relationships are like elevators, right? The right ones take you up, the wrong ones take you down. But what I've learned is that often you can be anointed and talented and gifted and have the degrees and have all the right connections. But if you don't do relationships well, that'll ultimately be your demise. So that's why I felt called to write the People Factor.
Gotcha. Then you followed up with the I Factor, and you
absolutely
kind of 3 dynamics to winning with I. What were those? So I know you talked about identity was a big piece.
Sure.
So the factors to I Factor kind of.
Yeah. Well, the reality that I was wrestling with while I was, the People Factor and took that book around the world. But I really began to wrestle with the fact that a lot of times the biggest relational burden, challenge, issue for leaders is not just can they relate to other people well, it's can I manage myself? And history is littered with, I mean, recent history and history, that goes back in time. You see this pattern of leaders who had everything going for them, but they crashed and burned because they couldn't manage themselves well. And that was what this whole issue of the I Factor was about. That first, in order for me to relate well with others, I got to also be able to manage myself. And what I learned is that this notion of the I Factor revolves around 3 things. Identity, like who are you? A lot of people love this notion of purpose, right? I got to learn my purpose. God, what am I here for? And what I tell people is the purpose is the what question, right? What am I on this planet to do? God, what did you put me here to do? And purpose is a great question, but the what question is a secondary question. The first question is a who question, because if you don't know who you are, you can't get to the what question. And so that's what identity is about. You got to settle that first, because when you know who you are, then everything begins to open up. The second piece is significance, that God put you here for a reason, right? That you were created for something great. And when you understand that, then you can handle the hurdles and obstacles because you have a greater sense that there's something beyond it. And then it's perspective. That's the other key to having a good I Factor. It is not what you go through, it's what you see, and it's how you handle what you go through. You can take 2 people and send them through the same challenge and hurdle. One person come out better and the other person come out bitter, not because they're any different, but because their perspectives are different. And so those are the 3 keys to having a healthy I Factor.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna tie this back together. So it takes 2 who is helping you lead. So I wrote this book to two audiences. One, I'm writing to the senior leader, basically to understand you can do it by yourself. If you have good help, appreciate them. If you don't have good help, I listed some qualities to help you find a good 2 or 3 man or woman or whatever, a good team. Then I'm writing to those who may serve in the 2-man spots, the executive leaders, the CFOs, the COOs, the supervisors, to help them understand how to be successful in doing that. If that's your calling, to be a 2-man or a 2-woman, how do you remain faithful? How do you remain loyal and committed to that? So what I want to say to you from the people factor, I know you kind of give us some strategies on how to exit. Mm-hmm. I've asked every other leader on here, what do they do? What do they look for? I know I've given qualities to look for, but I asked them what to look for. I want you to tell us what happens when you pick wrong. How do you exit from the wrong people?
Sure. Well, the first thing is not to panic. The greatest example I think of picking wrong is Jesus and Judas. And so if Jesus picked wrong in a sense, or if a relationship went wrong with Judas, as we know it did, then it tells us, first of all, that we're not going to get it right all the time. Some people are in your life for seasons and reasons. Some people are in your life for the long term. And so a relationship can go bad when a person's season expires, or a relationship can go bad when the reason that they entered into your life or that God sent them into your life has come and gone. So, don't overthink it. Don't overanalyze it. Don't allow the enemy to get you to question and second guess yourself and even your ability to judge people. It happens, right? But when you realize that season has ended or that reason has come to its conclusion, a couple of things. You want to communicate very clearly about where you're going, the direction that you're headed in. Okay. But then you also want to thank them for the value that they added to your life in a previous season. And a lot of times people miss that, and they say, oh, they're horrible. Well, they were not always horrible, because if they were always horrible, we wouldn't have entered into a relationship with them in the first place. So chances are at some point they did add value, and you want to thank them for that. You want to honor them for that. But you want to do that in line with, this is where we're headed now. And based on where we're headed now, I don't feel like this is a good fit, or that we are congruent for this next iteration of the business, for this next season that I'm walking into. And so you want to clearly communicate that, but also value them. The worst thing that a leader can do is to demean a person going out of the door, because you don't ever want to burn bridges, because you never know, number one, how God will bring that stuff full circle. But then the other thing too is, as leaders, we still have the responsibility for the heart of that person, even when their season has expired. Because if we don't handle their heart correctly, they're going to take that hurt into the next place. And if they take that hurt into the next place and they're not healthy for their next place, we're partly responsible for the toxicity that they're carrying into that next place. So you want to honor them. You want to clearly communicate, where you're headed. And then you want to bring that relationship to a close in an honoring way, but in a way that also opens the door for whatever may come next. You never know. So you just want to kind of follow those principles. You don't have to shy away from it, but you also don't have to be ugly in the process. And I really believe that if we did that better, we'd see more healing and more reconciliation, even in relational transitions.
Such a good pastor. Such a good pastor. All right. So what if they ugly? What if they're cancers? What if they're stabbing you in the back and creating a cantankerous relationship at the end? How would you handle it the same way?
Oh, absolutely. And this actually is a great example, because a lot of people and their dislike for even me going to the White House is based upon what the president has done or what he said. And, the simple things that we tell our children still applies for top level leadership. The golden rule is, you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Once again, this gets back to the selflessness of a leader. See, the only time that backstabbing really becomes problematic is when it's about your ego. But when it's not about you, people can say and do what they will, and you wear it like a loose garment and you keep rolling. Now, for those people that are believers, we have every right to behave that way in terms of not sweating it and being selfless, because God promised to be our vindication. He promised that he always is going to fight our battles. One of my life verses is, those who put their trust in the Lord will never be put to shame. So we don't have to retaliate. As a matter of fact, we're called as leaders biblically to live a crucified life. The Apostle Paul says it is no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is, even if you're not a believer in the marketplace, if you've been an effective leader, your work speaks for itself. And what ends up happening when people get messy and when they try to be divisive, it really proves to everybody else how cantankerous and toxic they are when you continue to lead at the high level and you don't stoop down. Real leaders don't get down into the dirt. I mean, real leaders don't have the time to get down and deal with pettiness, because if you're leading at the level you should be leading in, that level of pettiness is so beneath you that it would actually demean your leadership for you to come down out of your perch and deal with that mess.
Man, so good. Dr. Van Moody, y'all. Dr. Van Moody. So listen, man, it is August 14th. I know today is a special day.
Yes.
It's two of my daughter's birthday, first of all.
Wow.
Let me say that.
Tell them I said happy birthday.
Yeah, my oldest and my youngest was born on the same day.
Wow.
August 14th. But I know it's a special day for you, man. So what is happening today? You just gave birth to something today. Talk to us.
Yeah, man. Desired by God hit bookstores around the world today. Desired by God is the third and final book in the Factor trilogy. So we talked about the people factor. That's your relationships with other people. The I factor, your relationship with yourself. But Desired by God is about the most important relationship, and that's your relationship with God. Ramone, I think we're living in a very, very peculiar time. The statistics are alarming about what's happening with people leaving the faith, with what's happening with churches in America. And I just believe that God has been misrepresented and mischaracterized on some of the most critical issues facing our society and culture. And so Desired by God was a labor of love. And I can't wait for people to get it, because it is going to separate fact from fiction and really present in a unique way who God is, how throughout history God has been presenting himself as someone who is passionately in love with us, regardless of our race, regardless of our mistakes, regardless of our background. But then also what happens when you open your heart to receive that love. It changes your life in all of the best ways. And so I can't wait for people to get Desired by God. It's going to bless your socks off. Leadership is in there. Heart stuff is in there. It's just an amazing book. And I think if I never write again, now this is going to be a big statement, but I want y'all to hear this. If I never write again, this was the book that I was meant to write. I think it's better than the people factor. It's better than the I factor. I think all of that was entry level, priming the pump for Desired by God. So it's a game changer. And I'm so excited. I've been sitting on this. I finished the manuscript at the end of last year. And when you give it to the publisher, they determine when it's going to come out. So I've just been waiting for the better part of 9 months for this book to be released. So I'm super excited for people to get it. It's really going to bless a lot of people.
Okay. So do you need to have read People Factor and I Factor first?
No.
Or you can pick it up and catch.
You can pick it up, and that's the unique thing. It's a trilogy of books, but you can read them in any order and benefit from it.
Awesome. So where do we get the book at?
Well, the book is available everywhere the books are sold. You can get it at any bookstore online. You can get it at any bookstore in your local city, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. It's available around the world. I've got people in London that's talking about the book, Sweden, people in Asia, people in Africa talking about it. So it's everywhere. So I want to encourage people to make sure that they get it and then share it with a friend.
Y'all go get it. Even on audio, it is there. Desired by God.
Yeah.
Man, I told you, I downloaded on audiobooks and I started listening to it. I said, man, listen, this man then went to the White House and I think he went to the mountaintop or something. The voice that I'm hearing sound like the voice of God or something, but that's somebody else narrating.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm excited, man. I'm excited to dig into it, man. I'm excited about what you're doing. I think it was so good. I'm glad you had a chance to come on tonight.
Thanks for inviting me, man.
yeah, some of the people who are watching, because I know it's been all kind of pandemonium these last couple of weeks, and I think it's always good. You need to hear it from the source.
Oh, absolutely.
From people, because a lot of times we judge people too quickly, and we're judging based on sound bites. And so I've known, like I said, I've followed you for years, and I've read your stuff. We've been in Phoenix every year together, and so I wanted you to come on and just whatever's on your heart, man. I'm gonna support you. I agree. With leadership, you're not gonna make everybody happy, and you can't choose to go that way. Somebody I was talking to on Facebook when they were mad at you and John and all these different people, I was like, man, I'm trying to wrestle with, like, if I was given that opportunity to be there, and if I care about the subject matter, would I not go because I dislike an individual, or would I want to have a seat at the table to at least let my voice be heard? Maybe he never go consider what I had to say, but if it's affecting my people, why wouldn't I want a representative there who could at least speak on our behalf? So however people take it, I think to hear from you yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Explain it. I had a chance to watch your press conference at the church.
Yeah.
It just kind of tell your story. It was just, tough situation, but in times like this, we need true leaders.
Absolutely, man.
Not always going to be popular, man. So I applaud you for doing what you felt like you needed to do. I saw after that, the day after, whatever, the bill moved from one place to another. So kind of what you went for. And, man, keep doing what you're doing, man.
Well, Ramone, I appreciate you, man. And I appreciate and applaud who you are, your desire to pour into other leaders. These are the conversations that unfortunately don't get a lot of times the mainstream kind of press. But this is where the real stuff is happening, man. And so I just pray, and I will continue to pray, that God keeps his hand on you, but also increases your platform, because these are the real conversations that healthy, effective leaders need to be engaged in, and not the messy, tearing down, judgmental stuff. And nobody got time for that. And, man, we are in a very critical season where real leaders and real men and women of character and integrity have got to stand up and be heard. And I know that you're in that remnant, man, that God is raising up. And so I applaud you. I appreciate you. I know Pastor Johnson and Pastor Daniels, their ministries wouldn't be what it is without you. And a lot of times I know what it's like, because for 13 years, I was the executive guy. I was the number two.
Right.
And I tell you now, man, a part of who I am as a pastor is because I spent 13 years on the other side, and I have a great appreciation for the team. I mean, our ministry would be jacked up if it was just about me, right. So I appreciate what you do, and I hope that your followers, I hope that your sphere of influence increases, because these are the things that we need to talk about more. But unfortunately, we don't talk about enough.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm going to keep talking about it to everybody that's going to listen. But, again, it takes two, man. You can't do it by yourself. And a lot of times you don't have to agree with everything, but you need to try to get an understanding. And I think that's important. So, man, keep it up, man. It takes two. I mean, I wanted to talk to you because you are the relationship guy, and that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. And I share people, man, as great as Michael Jordan was, he never won a ring until Scottie Pippen became into his own and stepped up as a two-man.
Come on.
And Scottie was able to accept his role and play his role, back to this whole identity thing that you're talking about. And so I understand I'm a dream interpreter. I'm a Joseph that are called to help the leaders of today execute their vision. And I don't need to be in your spot, but I am here to support you, man. I want to see you guys do your best. So appreciate you, man. Keep doing
Appreciate you, brother. Good stuff, man.
All right. Take care, man.
Take care. Love to your family, man. And your daughters. Happy birthday.
Thank you, man.
All right, brother.
The book, y'all. Go get the book. Desired by God, Van Moody. VanMoody.org.
Yep.
VanMoody.org. Van Moody on every platform. And it's everywhere. Barnes & Noble, iBooks, Amazon. Go get it today, y'all. It's out today. Appreciate you, man. Love you.
All right, man. Love you too, buddy. Take care. Peace.